Right. Hi everybody, my name's Mia Peters and I'm a service design lead at Waltham Forest Council. Um, we're a council in North East London, one of the London boroughs, and we've got an in-house service design team. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is some context, a bit about Waltham Forest and the team. I'm going to go through some case studies with you about the kinds of projects that we work on. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we want our design offer to be going forward. So context, one of the questions that I get asked a lot is how did you gain traction? And it's an interesting story. 18 months ago, the service, well, just over 18 months ago, the service design team in Waltham Forest started. They recruited 3 service designers at the same time, so we all came in within about 2 weeks of each other, and we were catapulted into a virtual service design hub that covered insights, contract management and commissioning, and then us as service design. Wasn't what any of us were expecting. We come from very different backgrounds. You'll be interested to see that nobody has digital backgrounds, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we came from lots of different backgrounds and had sort of customer experience, marketing, legal kind of experience. I don't think anybody was expecting to work quite so closely with commissioning. What the council had a problem is that the commissioning that they were doing to buy services across, lots and lots of council services wasn't happening very well. The typical experience was that a contract was coming up for renewal, the dates got changed, maybe a few details got changed in line with maybe new sort of legislative process, and it went out again to tender. And so what they wanted was to have a design team who could really pull those contracts apart, work out whether we still wanted to buy that thing that we had been buying for the last 3, 5, 7 years, whether we could group a number of sort of services together to buy to get economies of scale, and just really to find out what the service users wanted, to find out what stakeholders were thinking. So very quickly we got into lots of sort of detailed service specifications. We were writing service specifications around things that we knew nothing about, like one of my colleagues' first ones was around gangs. And the gang, because there's a big sort of gang culture in Waltham Forest. We did stuff around looked after children. Did a lot of work around SEN services for children with special educational needs. So lots and lots of things that we just thought, oh, we don't know about this. But you know what? It was a really, really good thing, because when you go and speak to a social worker, or when you go to speak to a senior responsible officer of that service, that they're completely immersed in it, and then you can go and ask really curious and challenging questions because you don't know about it. And it's a good tool, because I think perhaps if I was a social worker going and asking other social workers about something, they might find that quite threatening. But as it was, when you're just saying, oh, well, I don't understand this, can you show me how that works and why does that happen? It's a much more neutral space. So we started off in this virtual service design hub, and working very closely with our procurement colleagues and getting involved in writing service specifications, getting involved in the ODU process, taking things through cabinet, taking things through key decision reports, and so it's an awful lot of work. We also did, generally what our process was to do the discovery phase, then come up with a number of models, check those out. Well, first of all, we had our sort of thematic analysis. Once we'd spoken to all the stakeholders, came up with a few models that we then financially modelled to work out what the best business options were and whether we were buying the right thing. And then from there, we then coached that through the governance process of the council, and then got to ITT, and then once the submissions came in, then we had to respond to those and work out what the best person was for the job. But in the middle of that, we also had to do work around shaping the market. Sometimes when we were working on very innovative solutions, the market wasn't ready for it, and so that was a really difficult one. So sometimes we had to go out to the market and say, look guys, we're thinking about doing this, what do you think? You know, are you ready to respond to this ITT? And sometimes they'd say, wow, that sounds really exciting. And other times they'd just say, no, you know, it's never going to happen, you know. And I think, you know, in local government, you do have to have a certain amount of pragmatism because you can't just change everything overnight. But so, as I say, we started off in that division, and although it was painful and we only got through it with perseverance and sheer bloody mindedness sometimes, what happened is that we got to a position where we were really changing outcomes for residents. We were optimising the resident experience. We were making sure that we weren't measuring contracts on KPIs, but on what the outcomes were for the residents. We were also saving money, and I was just looking at the contracts that I've worked on in the last 18 months, and I've saved £1 million in savings, and my other 3 colleagues have saved similar amounts. So we've paid for ourselves time and time and time again. You know? Well, the pay rise actually. So that's where we were, and then about 6 months ago, Transformation, who I thought that I would be working for when I first started, said, oh yes, we think we want you now, because we're not a digital service and we don't sit in digital. We work extremely closely with digital, but we don't actually sit in digital. And so it was felt that service design and getting a design methodology into the council, that Transformation was the right place for us to sit from to actually effect that change. So we started, I suppose what the change was when we came into Transformation is that instead of working purely on outsourced contracts, we were then working on internal service reviews as well. And we were working on service reviews that were under key programmes that reflected the council's strategic priorities and had certain targets around them, around outcomes, which were mainly savings focused when we went in, but we've managed to influence and shift that. One of my colleagues said to me the other day, do you know, if it wasn't for you guys, we'd just be a savings team. And I thought, well, that's good. We've done something good then. And you know, they know that with all of us, you know, whenever we come into a meeting and they're just, you know, saying, right, we've got to save, you know, 50 grand here or 2 million here, that we're always the ones that saying, but how is this going to impact on the experience? We need to go out and talk to people, and that's the change that we've really brought into Transformation, and we've really helped them raise their game. I think they would agree with that as well. So we've got a director who's the director of Transformation and HR, and then we've got a Transformation design team. I'll go back to that in a moment, but we have a transformation framework that we work to, and basically the discover and the design and test tend to be the transformation design team, and then the deliver and continuously improve tend to be the delivery team. So we have a delivery team that has I don't know, about sort of 10 or 12 project managers that work on delivering the projects, and then we work very closely with them and we work on the discovery part. It doesn't always work like that. It's never as clearly, you know, sort of lineated as that. You know, we often find that we're taking a project all the way through, and but on the other side, on the delivery side, if we don't deliver anything now that hasn't gone through, you know, sort of a discovery process and hadn't had some kind of insight, we got sort of like a standard kind of offer. These are the kinds of things that we do, you know, and I'm sure, you know, sort of many of you are familiar with these things. And I think that the issue with local government is that you have lots of politicians who want you to do certain things, especially when it comes to the year before elections. They're very good at going off, speaking to their constituents and, you know, sort of saying, oh, right, yes, we're going to deliver this. And you just think, oh, well, how are we going to do that? And then you've got the senior managers who, you know, I mean, on a recent, you know, SEN transport project said, well, I want you to deliver something that doesn't include buses. You know, it's tricky. That's going to be really tricky. And, you know, that there are lots of egos that have to be managed and politics that have to be worked out. So I just wanted to give you that sort of context around that, because I think it is important. And I think now that we're in the transformation team, what we're finding is that from working on projects that were almost like discrete projects, we're now working much more on programs where we can really influence what's happening across a whole program and bring in, you know, lots of design methodology. And we're at every table now, which is fantastic. I think where we were sort of 18 months ago when, you know, my very first project, and I spoke to, you know, I said to the senior responsible officer, who is one of our directors, right, okay, you need to meet with you, need to start that. He just said, oh, I haven't got time. And then when I did manage to get in front of him, he said, oh, you're never going to do it. Whereas now, that same director, I send an email, I get one back within 15 minutes. You know, the relationship has totally changed. But the reason that relationship has changed is because we delivered. We were on the ground. We were doing horrible stuff. You know, sometimes it was painful. Sometimes we just thought, oh, God, why are we doing this? But we consistently delivered. We consistently made sure that we kept our bar high and that the user was always at the centre of what we were doing, that it was always around that. We challenged and challenged and challenged. We provided an evidence base. And that's really what you have to do. And it's been a hard slog. But we have now got ourselves a really good reputation within Waltham Forest, and we're using that as a platform to build further. So let me tell you a little bit more. I've got a few case studies. The first one was our carers support service. And what happened here is that we had a very traditional service for carers, and it was, you know, it really consisted of tea and biscuits once a month, you know, sort of on the Tuesday afternoon, and it was very traditional. The service had got, the incumbent service who had this contract at the time had got very, very comfortable. They were in relationships with some of our politicians, not, you know, those sort of relationships, but just very close to some of our politicians. And it was just a very dry, a very uninspired kind of offer. But they thought they knew everything about carers. And it was really interesting because we found that our adult social care service probably, you know, had relationships or knew of about sort of 3.5% of carers. The Waltham Forest Carers Association, as they were at the time, knew about, you know, 7%, and, you know, I mean, unknown, nearly 90%. And there were lots of people who didn't identify as being carers because they had other things going on. And so we did a lot of discovery work with lots of people and found out that, you know, sort of a lot of the issues they were facing, they didn't want to come and have tea and biscuits with somebody, but they wanted, you know, tangible advice around sort of like welfare and financial advice. They wanted support to get into education and training, and emotional support as well, and things that they could do with the person that they were caring for locally, and lastly, some kind of advocacy. So, you know, what we made sure of is that we could, you know, deliver those kinds of things. And this is one of the guys that we met, this guy called Chad, he's a lovely guy, and he cared for his wife who had early onset Alzheimer's, and he was working, he was self-employed, and he was the only breadwinner, so he had to make sure that he went out to work. And he did come along to the monthly tea and biscuits, and that's what he said. I'll let you have a read of it. I mean, I think the thing that we found so upsetting is that he had to put a brick against the door so he could go out to work to earn money and know that his wife wouldn't leave the house. And, you know, that was just, as I say, we spoke to lots of people, but he was one of the ones that really stood out. And he just didn't feel that there was anything for him at that group. And he wanted advice about his rights. He wanted to know if he was entitled to any welfare benefits and all those things that go with the responsibilities you have when caring for somebody. And, you know, he just didn't feel that he was getting that from the group. He kept going along because he thought, oh, you know, something's bound to happen. But after 2 years, he'd not even made any friends. And, you know, when you're that isolated as a carer, then that's, you know, it's a really sad state of affairs. So we procured a new contract, different provider, so that didn't go down very well. There was a bit of a shitstorm around that, you know, sort of everyone was talking to the politicians and saying it can't happen, but it did happen. And now we've got, you know, a service that is really, let's get back to that one, that's really predicated around delivering, you know, support, making sure that people, you know, can feel that they've got advocacy support, that there's support around, you know, helping them with benefits and all the practical things, as well as having some really nice activities that they can go out to. So that's, I'm going to sort of romp through those because I've got 3 of them. And so, yeah, so that was our commissioning model, you know, outreach, advocacy and well-being. And now this one, the next case study, this was high needs outreach. And what that is that when there are children and young people who have got special educational needs, to help them actually remain in or attend a mainstream school. Because in Waltham Forest, we're in quite a weird situation. We've got lots and lots of special schools. And so there is a tendency for people to say, oh, well, yeah, that child should really go to a special school. But, you know, there's lots of evidence to say that if children with SEN needs can be supported in a mainstream school, they'll have a higher level of educational attainment. So this was a contract coming up for renewal, 5 contracts with 2 different providers. None of them were configured towards the you know, the Care Act and, you know, the way that services should be configured now. It was just very, I don't think they'd been reviewed for about 10 years or so. And so the requirement here was to say, well, you know, do we need to configure these services differently? Do we still need to buy all these services? Do we need some economies of scale? Do we just need to buy them from one provider? Do we need to buy them from several? You know, what's really the problem here, kind of thing. So lots and lots of discovery work. I went into most of the schools in our borough, and well, most of the mainstream schools in our borough, and it's quite interesting that lots of the SENCOs, who are the SEN coordinators, so they're teachers and they have that responsibility, said, well, either, oh, we didn't realise that there was that service available, which really worried me because council were paying 1.6 million for it per annum. Didn't realise that was available, or if they did realise it was available, it was just, oh, well, we don't use it very much. You know, it's got, and occasionally if we do need to use it, we phone up Sally, you know, in that school because we know her. And so no process, nothing digital. It was just, oh, it was a disaster, really. And there was some excellent work being done, but in tiny, tiny pockets. And the excellent that we wanted across the piece, that consistency was non-existent. So I went and spoke to lots of people, and parents and young people as well that were in schools, and just to really find out what their view about their experiences of outreach, or how they, you know, what they aspire to, what they wanted from outreach. And spoke to this great woman, Julia, and she's got one child, Josh, who's got global development delay. And so what I went through with Julia is I went through a really sort of like in-depth interview. And I think this is one of the things that we find is very useful to sort of almost like, you know, socialise our services within the council when we show people how we can do in-depth interviews and, you know, the nuggets and the gems that we get from those. So I interviewed Julia one day, and this is what I came up with. And so I don't know if you're going to be able to read all of this, some of you at the back, but basically I went through a timeline of what had happened around Josh's diagnosis, and also how she felt about it, how the family felt about it. So it was really positive at the beginning, and obviously, you know, when Josh was diagnosed at about, you know, when he was about 2, it was a shock and it was a dark day, but then things went really well for a while. You know, the early years services around were really good, and he got, you know, physio, speech therapy and everything, and that all, and mainstream nursery worked well. And then it was transitioned to primary school, just didn't go well at all. And so what happened is he started at reception, and all those early years services just went bang, end, and that was it. And then the family were really struggling to work out what to do, because they knew that they got these great services before, but the staff there were just saying, oh, well, there's nothing we can do, you know, Josh is in mainstream school now. And they really felt like everyone had given up on them. They felt that those supports, you know, hadn't worked anymore, and they were really worried about Josh's progress. And so they got a private speech therapist, and they ran up thousands on their credit cards, and they weren't a high income family because they just couldn't get the support that they needed. And And then, what they found now is that in the mainstream school that Josh was in, it was a very inconsistent experience. Occasionally they were getting support from outreach, most of the time they weren't. He was due, when I interviewed Julia, he was due to go to secondary school, and at that point lots and lots of the schools they were going to were just saying, wouldn't Josh be better off at a special school? And Julia was saying, well, no, because we want him to have a better education attainment. He's got ambitions about, he wants to work as a graphic designer, he wants to get married, and he's not going to be able to do those things if he doesn't have any kind of qualifications. So they were really worried about what the future is going to look like for Josh. So that was and that particular contract knocked it down from 5 contracts to 1 with 1 provider, saved that's it, 363,000 per annum on it. And the outcomes are better. They've now got a case management system. They've got transparency. They can track the cases that are coming in. They've got loads and loads of stuff online. They had nothing online before. And now, if a teaching assistant maybe is transferred to another class where there's a deaf child, they can go on and they can find, some information about sensory impairment and, maybe some lesson plans, maybe some games that they can play. So there's like loads and loads of resources they've got on there. And so we really had to spec that. And the best thing that the provider said is, you've really, really made a step up to the plate now. I said, yeah. And that, as I say, that guy who was the my senior responsible officer, the one who didn't want to talk to me at the beginning, now requests my help on every single project, because he can see we sold him the concept. We said that design would help. He didn't believe us, and then we proved it. So, and then the last one is about looked after children. The Future Gov people, colleagues here, were talking about, some of the issues that councils have around looked after children, and they're services that cost the council a lot of money. They're very vulnerable children, and what we are finding is that there's a statutory requirement to have a review meeting, but some looked after children weren't engaging very well in their review meeting at all. So what we did is try to find out if we had a focus on strengths in the review meetings, how that might enhance their effectiveness. And because usually young people aren't very keen on engaging with their reviews, and these are some of the things that they say, they're long and awkward, it's intimidating, people are talking about me, and if I ask a question everyone goes quiet, and social workers think that young people are disinterested, and the independent review officers, who are social workers as well, are just saying that teachers and carers are a key resource, but not for just finding strengths but building on them. But usually what we did is we started these review meetings talking about all the things that were going wrong in that young person's life, and saying, oh well, they ran away from home again and they haven't passed their exams and everything. Well, no, nobody wants to be spoken about like that, and that's a very intimidating environment. So if you can actually start with all the things that are really, really good. So we started looking at sort of an asset-based approach here, and we had really sort of good outcomes with that. And so what we found is we've got some anecdotal evidence so far, because this was a project that was only delivered about 4 or 5 months ago, but so far what we're finding is when we're getting feedback is that those meetings are starting to go better. And we also did a lot of training with social workers as well, to make sure that social workers weren't just sort of saying, oh right, this is what we want to talk about, these are all the bad things that we want to talk about with you, that they actually really had some training about a strengths-based approach. So those are a few case studies. We work, I suppose the only thing that we haven't worked on in the last 18 months is waste, but I'm sure that will come. But we work across adult social care, children's social care, housing, and lots of different things. And then there's some corporate projects that we work on. I mean, at the moment, I'm just done a feasibility study for whether we have an internal recruitment agency, because the council spends millions and millions of pounds on agency staff. So if we had our own internal recruitment agency, how might that work and how could we save money? So that's something that's in train at the moment that I'm working on. The other big thing that we're working on is our commercialisation strategy, because I think somebody mentioned before, you know, the way the councils are being funded is being reprofiled from 2020. We've lost about 60% of funding already. We're going to lose most of it. And so how do we make money? How do we sell our services out? There's some obvious ones, and there's some initial work that's been done on handyman services, gardening services and everything. But now we want to get into the more complex services and work out how we can actually sell those out. So we're just setting up an incubator at the moment to take through several services. We've identified 10 so far. One of them is service design, to take those services through an incubator process, which is a 12-week process, and then to work out whether they are viable commercial opportunities at the end of it, and then what kind of commercial vehicle we will use to sit those services in. You know, there's lots and lots of rules about the kinds of, you know, commercial vehicles we can use, and so we have to think of things that will be profitable but will also deliver our values. And we've got, you know, sort of reputational issues. We don't want to necessarily get into bed with organisations who don't share our values, and so there's lots of considerations around that. But we've been working on a design offer to sort of share with our internal colleagues, and one of the key things is it helps us sort of, you know, socialise or normalise design techniques and thinking across the organisation. And you know, so these are just a couple of slides. So this is what we've been going out to team meetings with, and we've picked up a lot of interest. And then we've got a pipeline. So what we have to do is, if somebody says, oh, I'm really interested in you working with us, if it's just a case of, you know, a couple of workshops on how they might improve their interview techniques, then we're quite happy to do with that. But if they want us to work on a very large project with them, then we've got a pipeline process that we share with our digital colleagues. I told you we work very closely with our digital colleagues, and that's the way that we do things. So we'll look at an opportunity, and then we'll we'll triage it by asking some key questions. Then we'll do something called a fast scope, and the fast scope enables us to that's maybe about half a day's work to see whether this is something viable to go forward and what resource we can put against it. And at that point, we will identify whether at what point our digital colleagues need to get involved in that. And it's usually entry level, and we work very closely together, even though we're not in the same divisions. And this is what we've been taking through. So we explain to them, you know, what it's about, what service design is, because there's some people that still haven't heard of service design, how we work. So, you know, we give them our approach, and then we tell them about when we should and shouldn't use it, because when you've already decided what the solution is a very common, you know, sort of theme. And then, you know, we take them through some principles and approach, and just really help them understand what service design can do for them. And then we work in three ways. We'll either do the work for them with some knowledge transfer, we'll work with them so that we've got shared leadership and planning, and we'll work to enable them to design for themselves. So that's something that we're, you know, sort of like spinning out, you know, to lots of parts of the council, and then hopefully we will see that as our platform for building on to sell our services outside, because, you know, we have to be sort of commercial, you know, come the next couple of years. So I showed you the transformation work earlier, but as you can see, you've got, you know, the idea that comes here, we triage it, fast scope it, work out whether it's a go, no go. And sometimes we'll tell people, well, you need to refine that, or we need to find a different way of doing that, and we'll push them back to the beginning. And then only after that, it will go through to our transformation network. And that's it, folks.